Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Emily and Hannah, with eyes frozen in shock, looked at the smoking ashes that used to be their home. The firemen were pouring water on it. But what was the use? The old country house made of logs burst into flames like a match because of faulty wiring. The eldest of the sisters, 18-year-old Emily, was preparing to graduate from high school and become a student at a college in the nearest town. Only now the future did not seem so carefree and ordinary to her. She was left alone, for the main mother of the sisters died just recently in the winter, and the girls had no time to recover from the loss, as fate has prepared them a new blow. "Emily, what shall we do?" Hannah cried, grasping Emily's dress, in which she had returned from a walk with her friends, while her little sister frolicked with hers far from home, out riding their bicycles outside the village. At that time of day, many were working in the field. Smoke was not noticed immediately, and waiting for firefighters in their area was a lost cause. People extinguished the house on their own. Dragging buckets from wells, Emily rushed in, screaming with horror, seeing from afar that their house had turned into a black box. There was no more roof, no more windows, no more doors, no more furniture from her mother's miserable savings. The girl could not believe this was happening to their family. For 3 long years they had struggled with their mother's incurable illness. For 3 years they went to sleep anxious, not knowing if Caitlin would last until morning. Emily was just beginning to get her life back on track, meeting classmates, dreaming of a graduation party, and preparing to work on a local farm to support 12-year-old Hannah. After all, she was now considered her guardian. Emily blamed herself for her weakness for leaving home that day, for wanting to unwind. Everything was going to be all right. "Sweetheart," she repeated as if she were delirious, stroking her sister's hair, and she could not believe what she was saying. Emily did not consider herself truly mature, but she had to learn a lot, faced with the adult world. For the first time, they were sheltered by neighbors. Aunt Sarah, a close friend of her late mother, gave the sisters a room, so that Emily could at least finish her studies and get a certificate of 11 years of education. The entire village helped the firefighters, but it couldn't go on all the time. The girl went to the housing fund to see if she could speed up the process of getting new housing. "It's not that simple," said a strict employee of the organization. "Looking at the naive child in front of her, there is a waiting list, and you are still the last on the list. So be patient." Hannah was very afraid that she and her sister would be left on the street, and she often cried, worrying about the future. "We don't have parents, and now the house is burned down," wailed. She wiped with her sleeve. Hot tears in Aunt Sarah's kitchen were considered homeless. "I'm too young to work. What can you do? You're no different from me. Just out of high school. You'll be all right. You'll see. Stop crying so much. I'm going to cry too." She hugged Emily Hannah, holding her close to her. She didn't know how to cheer her sister up, how to make her believe that they could survive in the big world on their own. No one would take care of them forever. Sarah's husband was already squinting at her sisters, thinking them mere freeloaders. Any patience had come to an end, and the girl knew it was time to make a desperate move. "You know, you and I will move to the city. I'll just find us a place to live, and we'll move right away. There are more opportunities there. I'll find a job, and we'll put you in school. You'll make new friends there, and we'll forget all about it. It'll be fun. You'll see." Emily shared her plans with Sarah, who promised to help. She was a kind, compassionate woman. She would never say no to her friends' children. Since Caitlin was gone, she tried to pay more attention to her sisters, be involved in their lives, help them with money, and sometimes remind them that they were still children and had to dream. Not a couple of weeks later, Emily and Hannah, unencumbered by many things, moved to town. Long, saying goodbye to Aunt Sarah at the bus stop. Here, she held out a handkerchief to the older of the sisters. "It's not enough for you to live a luxurious life at first, but it's already something. Hold on, my girl. It's up to you now." Tears came to Sarah's eyes, and she hurriedly wiped them away alternately, hugging them both. Well, God willing. Call me sometimes. Don't forget. Thank you for everything. Sobbing, Emily said, throwing herself on her aunt's neck. I will not forget your kindness, I promise. See you again. The small room in the communal apartment, which the girl rented from a nice old woman, emphasizing that she liked order. It was quite comfortable. The newcomers had everything they needed to live in it, and the sisters had gotten used to not the most comfortable conditions lately, so they didn't complain. Hannah quickly walked around the new dwelling, went through the kitchen, even got to know the tenants of the neighboring rooms, and assured her sister that she would be responsible for cooking her own food. I had already learned a thing or two. This is a communal kitchen. Can someone help? Hannah said with a smile, trying to take one worry off Emily's shoulders. In the time that the sisters had lived with and without their sick mother, the girl had grown up too and realized that their life would no longer be as carefree as she would have liked. You are my sunshine, Emily, caressing her cheek with her hand. Hannah, and smiled. We are so lucky to have each other. The brutality of the city's foundations deflated all expectations of naive Emily in an instant. She thought she would do well in her job search. After all, she wasn't a slacker. Responsive, kind, considerate, wise bosses should have appreciated only to hire an inexperienced 18-year-old girl barely out of the village. No one wanted her. Some offices claimed that they did not care about seniority. They would train the new staff themselves. But this was written only in the ads, and at the interview I was overwhelmed with demands. With a lot of difficulty, Emily walked between the office buildings for days and managed to get a job as a cleaner in a chain of bakeries. After 2 strenuous interviews, she was to meet with the director, who was in charge of all matters at the office. And Madison immediately startled the girl with her commanding tone and the haste inherent in all bosses. I expect quality, timely work from you. If you can do it, there will be no complaints, said the woman, engrossed in some documents. If you don't raise your eyes to the employee, you will be late for a fine. You will be absent somewhere during the working hours. Penalty, have an affair with one of us. I'll fire you. Got it, Emily responded. I talked to the shift manager. She'll show you around and give you a form. Well, good luck. In the shops, where work was boiling day and night, a whole crew was making order. They only crossed paths with the new girl in the locker room. The girl was given the job of cleaning the offices of the directors of human resources, advertising department, restrooms, and other areas. In just 1 week, Emily realized how unlucky she was to bend her back with a broom and mop in her hands for 9 hours a day. It turned out to be terribly difficult and painful, even at her young age. It absolutely wore her out in a shift, and she would come back to the communal apartment with no energy. And she still had to buy groceries, check on Hannah's homework, iron the bedding, and tackle a bunch of different household little things. In addition to the grueling physical labor, Emily faced ridicule from the staff. She worked mostly with business people, department heads, but the employees, who gathered together every morning for a break, for some reason disliked the newcomer, flocking themselves above her. It would have been better to hire a granny. Someone commented in a half-whisper, watching through a glass wall, as Emily wiped windowsill in the office of the chief. They hire useless youths who should have gone to school. Otherwise, some aunt would work here and get a raise. It's not that hard work for them. And this one is from the village, someone on the other side of the table said. It's probably the limit of her dreams. Didn't pass anywhere in terms of points, did not get in. Well, now she's doing it. The girl pretended not to hear all the caustic words and endured, so as not to quarrel with anyone. She did not want to find out later in Madison's office. Besides, she didn't think her boss was going to take her side. Week after week of living in the new place, Emily and Hannah got used to the changes. The younger sister went back to school. True, now she was surprised by the size, the facilities, the routines, the students dressing neatly and calling on expensive smartphones, and their interests. She still did her homework when she got home, and then she took over the cooking. Quickly, she found common ground with her roommates, did her laundry, put her room in order. Cleaning didn't require much effort, and Hannah tried not to let her sister crawl on the floor with a rag even at home. She was a little worried that her peers didn't take her for their own in any way. The children, who had long been divided into groups according to their interests and status since elementary school, looked at the newcomer with skepticism, knowing that she could not give them anything useful. And yet Hannah found herself friends only with boys. Since childhood, she was used to exploring new places, climbing trees, whistling, riding a bike, so it was easier to get close to boys. With them, she often went for walks after school, and even rode in the park on a bicycle, which she took. One day, Hannah accelerated and carelessly drove onto the part of the sidewalk where the tiles were being repaved. She couldn't slow down in time, hit the curb, and flew forward over the handlebars. A tremendous, paralyzing pain pierced the girl's back, leaving her gasping for air. Emily was distracted by the phone call when Madison walked by, immediately demanding no talking during work hours. But the sight of the girl made her frown. God. Emily grabbed her head, dropping the machine. I have to go. Madison, I don't know what to do. My sister hurt her back. With difficulty, she uttered, not realizing what had happened. Everything later. Go, darling. Go quickly. Emily stormed off to the hospital, not noticing the tears covering her eyes. Again, she felt something slipping away from her, but there was nothing she could do about it. Her little sister, her little joy, was writhing in pain right now. Among total strangers. Emily sat in the hospital corridor, up to her neck after talking to the doctor. Hannah would no longer be able to walk, getting around only in a wheelchair. The case is correctable. All she needed was an operation. Only the girl had no idea where she would get the money for it. Her mind went blank. Where is her mother? When is she so needed? Where is anyone capable of telling her what to do? The first thing the girl thought of was Madison, who seemed rich enough, and also business to get into the seriousness of her situation. Trembling with excitement and fear of getting rejected, Emily knocked on the principal's office, hoping to catch her alone. She cut right to the chase, not daring to waste a woman's time. I'll pay you back every penny. I promise. Do you want me to write you a receipt? Just help me, I beg you. The girl sobbed, losing all shame. She wasn't going to press Madison into tears. Only the tears poured out on their own. As soon as she made her request, she still couldn't believe that something so horrible had happened to her Hannah. Emily is absurd. Madison cut her off. You'll never make that kind of money, will you? How long will I wait for it back? You'd better go to the bank and tell them your problem. Take a loan. They'll meet you halfway. Trust me. People often come there with similar problems. Emily's heart sank. The rejection of her boss broke her. But there was a new chance. But there, too, a huge disappointment awaited her. A girl in a uniform in the colors of the bank calmly explained to her what was what. Unfortunately, we can't issue a loan in your name with your earnings. You won't be able to make payments, and you don't have any real estate to pledge. Seeing Emily's grim face, the consultant hastily added if you have some non-combustible amount in your account, for example, maternity capital, you could reconsider your applications. After the consultation at the bank, Emily walked home, mulling over the idea. How she hadn't thought of it herself. All she had to do was get pregnant and have a baby. How hard could it be? She even laughed out loud in relief, because the idea of getting money that way did not embarrass her at all. Such luck that she had listened to Madison's advice. After all, Emily was close to despair every time she saw the face of her doomed, motionless sister. Her heart bled with the desire to heal her by allowing her to run and laugh again. Only Hannah's face held a perpetual sadness and irritation. She was old enough to be a mother and young and attractive enough for anyone to like her. The unhappy sister looking out the window immediately wiped the happy smile off Emily's face. She suddenly felt ashamed of herself for smiling so brightly in front of someone who was now a stranger to such emotions. "What amused you so much?" Rude asked Hannah, pulling back the windows so as not to show how wistful she was. She was seeing people off, moving freely down the street on your own 2 feet. "You've been gone a long time. I'm hungry. I could have done it myself." But Hannah hit the armrest of the chair with anger and couldn't stop, despite the pain in her arm. "Stop it, please." Emily rushed over to her, dropping to her knees and hugging her sister to her emotionless legs. "Have a little pity on yourself. I'm trying to make a difference. Really, I haven't given up. Just be patient. I don't know how hard it is for you, but you mustn't be so rude." The girl didn't say anything back, hiding her face in her palms. She hated the fact that she depended on her sister for everything, which had only become a greater burden on her. And she couldn't change that. Now Emily was required to do the impossible. She was already struggling to cope. Hannah couldn't just accept the fact that she might never get out of that damn chair again. Warming up food for herself and her sister in the communal kitchen, Emily couldn't hear what the neighbors next to her were talking about. Sometimes they were awkwardly silent, knowing that now she was fiddling with her handicapped sister. All Emily's thoughts were occupied with the idea of giving birth at all costs. Emily could no longer see the suffering of Hannah, transformed from an angel trying to help with her heavy burden. Caring for the two of them became a nightmare. Often the girl would return from work from her desk in a room full of chaos. Her sister could no longer reach the things she needed, trying to take care of her own needs. So things would fall out of the closet, items would tip over from the table, drinks would spill out. Sometimes Hannah would wreck everything out of spite, because otherwise she couldn't sit in the boring room. She couldn't even get outside to get lost in the crowd for a while and forget about everything. After all, the building was old and was not equipped with ramps for the disabled to get down. Even with Emily's help, it was becoming a real ordeal. Sometimes, though, someone from the residents who cared helped. Seeing how the unfortunate sisters were suffering, all day long Emily was immersed in her thoughts, and even at work they noticed it, making unpleasant jokes about her, not hesitating to be heard. Her coworkers thought she was a simpleton because they never stood up to her and never threw mean looks at them. They didn't know what the quiet girl was going through inside. Emily considered her coworkers the surest and easiest option for her plan. There were many men in the office in their prime capable of conceiving a child. Some even had families, which gave them in the eyes of inexperienced girls significance, except that Emily didn't want to seduce the married ones. She was afraid. Yes, and she considered it an occupation nasty and unforgivable. But single employees seemed dangerous to her, capable of opening her mouth at the most inopportune moment and tell the whole office and the company. What kind of relationship did he have with the young cleaning lady? She certainly didn't want to embarrass herself publicly. But then what should she do? She didn't want to have an affair with the first person she could find, either. She couldn't even imagine herself in such circumstances. This is a complete stranger with his own cockroaches in the head, views on life, reactions. What if it wasn't safe to be alone with him? She has no one but Hannah. And if she suddenly disappears after a one-time date, they won't look for her much, and her sister will be put in some godforsaken boarding school for the disabled, and she will forever lose hope of getting well. Emily didn't have any boyfriends either, which made the task more difficult. Still, she decided to find a lover for one night in a nightclub, where she would never have gone alone. Under different circumstances, she wore her best, but still a modest dress by the standards of urban fashionistas. All in all, the girl's image gave her away as a simpleton. But even for this type, there were interested guys. Emily had never been to such noisy establishments before, and she was hardly allowed into the club. Doubting that she was of legal age, Emily couldn't think of anything better to do than to splurge on one expensive cocktail and stand at the bar for hours just to be seen by someone. Every time someone approached, Emily looked away and turned the other way, avoiding contact. But one young man seemed nice enough. He complimented her headband. and the girl was glad that it really suited her. The acquaintance proceeded in a relaxed manner. The boy occasionally leaned in to be heard and touched Emily's cheek with his nose. He might have made a good potential father, only she suddenly chickened out. The realization that the girl was doing something frightening and undignified suddenly overcame her just at the moment when the acquaintance asked her if she minded leaving the club. Emily ran out into the street alone and ran wherever she could, afraid of being chased. She feared what she was about to commit with a stranger and did not act so recklessly again, deciding next time to make more lasting acquaintances so she could trust her companion. As time went on, Emily was nervous about taking too long to find a partner, and her poor little sister continued to languish in a wheelchair. Those friends that the girl had made at school quickly evaporated, for now they were no fun in her company. She did not eat much, so she noticeably lost weight. She was often silent when Emily tried to entertain her with conversation. There was nothing joyful on her face anymore, only sadness and pain. While her sister was at work, Hannah drew an entire sketchbook and spent the day staring at the screen of an old phone that still supported games. Things were no better at the bakery office. Emily was still unrecognized by the staff. They didn't give her any special attention. The girl only socialized with some of her night shop coworkers who were changing at home just as she was coming to work. They were pleasant, middle-aged women. Both were pulling their families on their shoulders, having been left without breadwinners. One had lost her husband in a divorce, the other had kept her. They had a lot of things in common. "Too bad we live so far away," Brianna said, putting on her blue jacket. "So my girls would have sat down with your Hannah. Get her to talk a bit. They're peers after all. It would be easier for them to find common ground and share their worries." "She's right, Emily." And Kaylee's other coworker smiled. "They're at an age now where they don't trust adults. They want to keep everything to themselves. Maybe this weekend we can introduce them with hope in our voices," Emily asked, relieved that Hannah wouldn't be lonely. That evening, after her shift, Emily bought a packet of eclairs with sweet cream on top. What did my little sister like so much? I decided to tell her about the acquaintance, which could take place next weekend, but I was afraid of Hannah's reaction. She had rejected all of Emily's enthusiastic proposals since her injury, not agreeing to change anything in her life and wishing she would just be left alone. "So how was the day?" Emily asked, sitting down, on her knees in front of her sister. "And I brought you some sweets, to spoil you a little." Hannah immediately frowned, but the inn accepted weakly, smiling. "What do you think? Did you ride around the room out of boredom? There's a bruise on my leg," the girl said, disgruntled, showing the spot on her knee. "I have a paycheck coming in soon. Maybe we could go for a walk on Saturday in the park on the embankment. There's fresh air, nature. Get some ice cream." Hannah was rather bored with her confinement. The suggestion was to her liking. "Okay, let's, but if they stare at us and whisper right home, I'm sick of their pity. It's not like I've got problems of my own. They'll all hatch like one." Kaylee and Brianna, as promised, brought their babies for a walk. And now Hannah was accompanied by 2 girls and a boy. They quickly got to know each other curiously, squinting at the wheelchair, though we warned them not to do so. Sister Emily was quiet at first, while the rest of the group talked non-stop about some new superhero cartoon. But then the little girl joined in and got into the conversation. Emily, watching her with one eye, was pleased to see her eyes light up as she interacted with her new acquaintances. It had been a long time since she had seen her sister so smiling, so free-spirited, as if she had forgotten about her ailments. After a bite to eat in the cafe, the company decided to walk along the river, watching the dark waters, which reeked of coolness. Emily was distracted for only a moment, fixing her scarf, when a bunch of young people, actively gesticulating and bouncing with emotion, passed by. One guy was walking forward with his back to tell his friend something funny from hitting Hannah's stroller, which immediately moved and rolled away. Emily squealed her frightened sister at full force, taking the chair with her whole body, flying at speed. Emily turned around and didn't immediately realize what was happening. Hannah had just been in front of her, and now she was there rushing at full speed toward the concrete street vase that stood by the bench. Hannah didn't. Out came her screaming. The girl ran after, realizing that she would not be able to catch up and stop the stroller. A collision could not be avoided. She's going to crash. Catch her, catch her. She yelled, calling for passersby to help. But people only jumped to the side to avoid being hit. The handicapped woman screamed in fear or froze, unable to move from the strange sight. "Stop, Hannah, stop." And at that moment, a young vagrant jumped out of the neatly trimmed bushes and threw himself right under the wheels. Flying sidecar. He miraculously managed to snatch Hannah and jump to the side, leaving her vehicle to move on and fly into the concrete. "Are you okay?" asked the stranger. And the girl, still trembling, quickly nodded and wrapped her arms around his neck. "It's all over now. Do not be afraid." He stroked her head, trying to calm her down. God, Emily was there in seconds, all tears and frantic eyes. "My sweet girl," Emily took her sister from the man, sat her on her lap, stroking her face and checking to see if Hannah was hurt. "I was so terribly frightened. I'm glad you're all right. There's no pain anywhere." "No, I am not hurt." Hannah spoke in a voice colorless from shock and turned her gaze to her savior. "If it weren't for him." The girl pointed a finger at the stranger and fell silent. It was as if Emily came back to reality and for the first time paid attention to the homeless man, who by pure chance happened to be nearby and was not afraid to risk his own health for her sister's sake. "Thank you so much. You saved her life. You're a hero. I don't know how to thank you. She's all I have. I can't do it without her. I couldn't do it." Kaylee and Brianna were already hanging around, marveling at what had happened. They wheeled the rattling stroller closer, shook off Hannah's clothes, and helped sit her down. The hobo proved to be terse in his acceptance of gratitude. Emily threw herself on his neck in emotion and burst into tears of relief, despite the horrible smell of that body and the clothes that hadn't been washed in months. In spite of this, she did not feel the alcoholic fumes from the men. Suddenly, an intrusive thought began to flicker in her brain. After all, he could have made a baby too. So what? That he's a tramp, but young, brave, modest, and not ugly. He has good genes and doesn't hang around like that. And who would believe him if he suddenly began to boast in front of his comrades in misfortune? Emily didn't look at him with disdain. After all, life itself had not spoiled her. Who was she to judge people for their fate? After saying goodbye to her friends, the girl decided to take Hannah home. They both needed a break after the dangerous accident that had knocked them out of shape. For the first time in months since her injury, the girl was clinging to her sister so tightly, unconcealed by her need, that Emily smiled involuntarily at her tender impulses. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I wasn't looking out for you." Emily sighed. "I don't do well at all. This isn't going the way I wanted it to. I thought I'd move to the city and start making good money. And here's what happens. You're supposed to live the life of a normal high school girl and do the same things that your peers do. I couldn't replace your mother. How can I make it up to you?" Hannah pulled away from her sister, who she had hugged in her arms on the old couch until then, looking at her with bewilderment. "It was all my fault." She cried hot tears. "I was supposed to help you, but I only got in the way. I did it on purpose. You know I have no one else to be angry with, and you are there for me. You put up with everything, and you never reproach me. I want to make your life easier. I'm only making it worse. Forgive me, girl. My face is in my lap, sisters. I have behaved terribly. I've been unbearable. Don't you deserve it? I wouldn't want another sister. And you're trying for me, and I can see that." Emily smiled, kissing Hannah on the temple. She couldn't breathe in the joy that overwhelmed her. For the first time in a long time, her little Sarah showed her true feelings. She realized how unfair she had been and regretted it. A truce was declared between them, and both rejoiced that the tension was gone. The sisters hugged, laughed, and cried. They treasured what they had at that moment, in spite of all the difficulties that seemed impossible to overcome. "Let's not fight anymore," Emily asked. "I'm so tired of our hidden war. I can't take it anymore." Hannah nodded in agreement and decided not to show any more bad temper. Now she would watch what she did and figure out how to make things easier for her and her sister. Emily didn't want to let her savior out of her sight, so the next morning, she went to the quay to find him and thank him properly. After lying up half the night without sleep, she pondered how to give her a hint of his intentions. After all, you couldn't tell the first man you met that you were planning to have a baby with him, could you? Such a statement could scare off even the most direct person. The girl found the tramp without difficulty, figuring out among the passers-by his old coat that hung on his shoulders and stomped boots. "Hello," she smiled, appearing right in front of the young man. "You saved my sister yesterday, but we left so quickly that I could not thank you enough. Please accept this." Emily handed him a bag full of food that he could eat for days without fear of it spoiling. "That's very generous of you," Michael replied, not immediately accepting the reward. It seemed strange to the girl that he was too proud to rejoice at her gift. Still, he had no choice. It wasn't every day he got to eat something this good. "I didn't do it because I hoped for a return gesture." Speech. The men surprised Emily, but she was too late for work to pay proper attention. She had made a big detour on her way to work to catch him. Now she had to rush to get to work on time. Emily decided that she wouldn't intimidate Michael with her candor, but would try to get close to him and get to know the kind of man he was. If they became friends, it would be easier for her to ask him for something as personal as she had planned. Surely he was tired of being ignored by others, or simply shunned as if he were plague-ridden. And the attention of a girl who does not see the difference between them should attract. Emily went to the office, thinking her plan of action was perfect. She had little experience with the opposite sex. Her mother had raised her and Hannah strictly. Knowing that country girls didn't worry much about distance, beginning to mingle with guys early on. Later, when Caitlin fell ill, all sorts of romantic nonsense just didn't find room in the mind, busy with Emily's worries to reveal her interest in boys. The new hardships had thrown her out of whack again, forcing her to think only of her and Hannah's survival, but not of meeting a handsome prince. So Emily ran through her head the topics she could discuss with Michael to get to know each other better, to get him to like her, or at least not to push him away. The second time she met, she was able to get a better look at him, realizing that he wasn't much older than her and was even attractive. If the man had showered and shown himself in front of her clean, she might have been able to better understand her impression of him. But the communication between two completely different people spun on its own, without much effort on either side. At first, Michael was surprised by Emily's repeated visits. Then she came again and again, spoiling him with modest ins in the form of scones and hot drinks. The weather was getting cooler and cooler, and Emily was beginning to get worried about where her buddy was spending his cold nights. Here and there dodged an answer. Michael chewed on the delicious cabbage pie he'd been treated to. "You shouldn't think so much of me. After all, you have someone more important to think about." He smiled, reminding Hannah, "I'm sorry, I mind my own business. I suppose you want to talk about things that don't affect you in any way." Did she say something with a guilty look on her face? "Hannah sometimes asks about you." She even drew a picture. Here she pulls out a folded double sheet from her bag. The sheet she draws like a 6-year-old. Michael laughed. "Don't tell her." Emily began to notice how long her gaze lingered on the man's lips. She seemed genuinely interested in him, though she was afraid to admit it, even to herself. They had grown very close in recent weeks. Unwilling to part when Emily had to go home, only Michael made no attempt to cross the friendly line. After all, how could he claim the attention of a girl who had a completely different life? She took it as a natural doubt that he didn't think he was good enough as her chosen one. Then Emily moved into action, touching his arm or face more often, pressing him too close when they sat next to each other. She showed concern, trying to warm his hands in the cold wind. She tried to visit more often, to laugh and sigh how lonely and sad she was without a man's shoulder. Only Michael, as luck would have it, understood nothing about romantic affairs. He turned out to be a fool, which made her mad. Once again, when Emily reached out to the man with her tenderness, he tensed up a bit. "Look, you're too pushy," he muttered, and the girl was ready to burn with shame at his straightforwardness. "I understand that you're lonely and need friends, but your acquaintances might get the wrong idea. If any of them saw us together, what would they think?" Emily imagined the snide faces of her coworkers who wouldn't stop terrorizing her from time to time, but decided not to mention it. "Who cares who I hang out with? All that matters is that I'm comfortable with this or that person," Emily replied, trying to keep her voice lighthearted. "I am not ashamed of you, because for the first time in this city I have found someone who really understands me. Sometimes when I talk to you, I feel as if I'm alone, because the words flow so freely that I'm not even afraid that you'll judge me for something." Michael didn't answer right away. He stared into the girl's face for a long time, until she was embarrassed, and the smile slid off her face. Emily did not know how to explain it, so she decided to open up to her friend, not to hide anything else, and not to worry about the answer. "I have a serious talk to you," Emily sighed, realizing that what she was about to say could change their relationship forever, and it remains to be seen in which direction. More accurately, the request. "I need to get pregnant, only not by whom. I would like you to be the father, but I'm not going to impose paternity on you. I only need your help with the process." She blushed thickly, overcoming embarrassment. "I need the maternity capital to get Hannah the surgery. It sounds crazy, but it's my only chance. There's no other way I can get her back on her feet." What a challenge. Michael stretched out, not looking at his friend. "So I can't give you an answer right away. You confused me. I'll think about it." "Okay." But Emily didn't give up hope. She was sure Michael wouldn't refuse her, now that they meant something to each other. And why should he be afraid? The next day was a huge disappointment for Emily. When she arrived at the park by the waterfront, out of habit, arriving there before her shift started with hotcakes and a thermos, tea with lemon, Michael was nowhere to be found. At first she went around to every place she knew where he lived. She called for him, asked passersby about the unpleasant-looking man, but to no avail. He vanished without a trace, as if he had never existed. He had run away, hadn't he? Emily said to herself in annoyance, and left the food on the bench where they most often met. She thought the man might have simply ignored her, but stayed where he had been living for some time. Even after 2 weeks, however, he didn't show up. Emily didn't think the separation from her friend would affect her like this. She lost sleep, couldn't get his laughter, his eyes, his hands out of her head. Interesting plots of books he had managed to read in her distant childhood that she had never heard of before. She missed just his presence of support in words. Hannah had recently become addicted to reading comic books that her children had lent her. Kaylee had noticed, though, that her sister had changed somehow. Until recently, she had seemed joyful, dreamy, enthusiastic, but now she was quiet and moved around the room like a shadow. The girl knew of Emily and Michael's friendship and had seen how attached her sister was to him. Only now it was clear that there was a rift between them. She understood nothing of romance, but believed that Emily was suffering from love. "Stop being so sad," Hannah declared, and her sister looked at her openly for the first time in days. "Why are you suffering alone? Don't keep it to yourself. Tell me, we are the closest people to each other." Emily hesitated at first, but then waved her hand and spoke, not noticing how all the words and feelings poured out of her without stopping. Finally, she was able to get rid of the heavy weight of worry weighing on her heart. Emily also talked about her credit problem, her intention to get pregnant, and how bad she felt without Michael. Crazy. How on earth were you going to raise a child in poverty? Hannah stared at her sister, not understanding what Emily was thinking, when she decided to get the maternity capital. "You're an adult. You didn't think of that. We'll find another way. We're making ends meet as it is." Emily cried because the idea of getting the money for the operation had gripped her so much that she hadn't even thought about the consequences. Her little sister knew all adult matters far better than she did. How could she have been so careless? Why hadn't she thought about the future of the child she was about to conceive? Better Hannah had been the eldest. She would have done better than she had. Emily did not sleep well that night, worrying about what she should do and regain her sister's ability to walk, hoping that for once fate would help her and resolve things herself. Trying to get rid of her homesickness for missing Michael, Emily got caught up in her work and began to think more often about quitting. She didn't like the staff, and she had gotten along well enough with Kaulia and Brianna that the change in their relationship would not hurt them in any way. Her friends often offered to take her for a walk again, or to meet at someone's house to talk in a quiet atmosphere. And the children were always before their eyes. She was glad for every visit and new friends that did not allow her to feel bored and inferior, even sitting in a wheelchair. Emily turned to her at Brianna's table, while the children were frolicking in the other room and couldn't hear them. "I hope you're not angry when you find out. We applied to a volunteer organization in your Hannah's name. They do fundraisers for sick kids and for surgeries. They distribute ads on the internet, do mailings, and print in newspapers. Maybe you will be lucky, and they will help you to raise some money." And then, little by little, it would add up. Emily was at a loss. "I don't know what to say." Her chest cramped, and she covered her mouth with the palm of her hand. "I've never had friends like you girls. It means so much to me." Anna extended her arms for a hug, pulling Brianna and Kaylee closer to her. "Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart." "Thank you." The girls spent the rest of the day with a smile on her lips, hoping that this time they would get lucky and help would arrive. One weekend, when the weather was uncommonly warm, Emily urged her sister to hurry up and wait for her breakfast and pull on a tank top and sweater. After all, they were going for a walk. The girl thought it was a good day for Michael, who after the heavy rains could finally come out of his hiding place and enjoy the warm sunny day. A knock on the door interrupted her sad thoughts of her friend, and she hurried to the door. Before the curious Hannah opened it first, Emily was taken aback to see a young man on the doorstep. He bore a striking resemblance to Michael as well. He had a fancy short haircut, a scarf around his neck, a warm sheepskin coat, jeans, and heavy boots, obviously bought at a brand-name store. All you did was ask Emily, not noticing a lone tear dripping down your cheek. "Why do you look like that?" Michael squeezed his way into the room past the dazed girl and closed the door behind him so the neighbors, who were stretching their necks out of the kitchen, couldn't hear their conversation. He smiled, touching Emily's cheek. "Hi, there's time to talk." "Yes," she nodded lethargically, letting her guest sit at the table where Hannah usually did her homework, and sank down next to her on the stool. "I see, I have to explain myself to you." Missing without an explanation, but it was necessary. "I'm not really homeless. I come from a very well-to-do family. You might say, a major." Emily could hardly believe her own eyes. This was her friend. This was Michael. However, she could not so easily accept his new appearance, and the fact that she had been fooled for a long time. The man told her everything in order, apologizing in advance for having to hide the whole truth from her. "You see, I grew up well off. I was spoiled, and all my friends were like that in high society. I was always surrounded by beautiful, well-groomed girls with far-reaching plans for a promising guy like me. After all, next to me, they couldn't deny themselves anything. I never spared money on entertainment, friends, to seduce someone. But it wasn't until I got older that I realized that many people close to me took advantage of that. As soon as I stopped spending money, my company shrank drastically. I was left with a few loyal friends who would go to the fire and into the water for me. But with the girls it was more difficult. They were hitting on me just because of how I looked and what I could give them. But I was tired of it. I wanted sincere feelings for me. not for my family's money. In the end, my father, not me, deserves the credit for our prosperity. Although many girlfriends were unwilling to understand this, seeing only their own benefit, Michael confessed that he had decided to look for a worthy bride in a rather radical way, to pretend to be homeless and see how the opposite sex would treat him. I wanted to feel the kindness of our society. Believe me, few people like you were not afraid to visit me. Those passers-by who handed me money or gave me food never got too close. But you were the only one who thought I was human. You were the only one who showed true compassion. And you visited because you were interested in me. I disappeared because I thought you should know the truth. And I also wondered if you still came to that park, and if I was right about you. I fell in love with you as soon as I saw you. And when you asked me for a baby, I knew what you would do to save your sister. Emily wanted to yell at Michael for the stupid prank to tell them how much she missed him. But she couldn't say anything. She only stood up and moved closer to touch his hair and look into his eyes as she had before. Michael wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing his cheek against her belly and not wanting to let go. That's enough now. Hannah spoke up, frightened by the actions of her elders. I have a long time to pretend to be a piece of furniture. Emily and Michael pulled away from one another and laughed. They forgot their sister's presence and were embarrassed by the frank conversation. The walk took place after all. Michael didn't let Emily take her sister down the stairs on her own and handled everything himself. He arrived in a black SUV and entertained the sisters for a long time, taking them to such mesmerizing places in the city that they never knew they had. How beautiful! Hannah couldn't stop admiring, looking out the window. We have never been here. Thank you, Michael. You are a very cool man. He laughed in response and winked at Emily. She couldn't hide her smile because she felt happy because of the mood of the family and Michael's presence. She couldn't believe what was happening. She wanted to touch him all the time, to question him, to make sure that this was not a dream and that he was with her. Since then, when fate showed Emily that it was not cruel to her and that it could still surprise her, life had changed dramatically. Now every day began with a kiss from Michael. What was picking her up for a ride to work? Colleagues, more than once making up a couple kissing in the parking lot, could not hide their envy in their eyes, realizing that the country commoner had gotten such a rich man. How had she done it? Outraged one of the employees. I never left the hall and the beautician. And she grabbed such a gorgeous man, must have special talents. Winked at her the other one, chuckling. Country girls can be very nimble, don't you know? But no one dared to laugh in her face. They saw how happy and invulnerable the girl was, so they didn't even try to spoil her mood. In the evening, Michael would pick up his sweetheart from work again, pick up Hannah, who was bored with her lessons, to have dinner together in some beautiful place, an institution where he usually took his sisters. They were so well-mannered that no one squinted at the girl in the stroller, and the staff would politely offer a plaid to cover the legs to a shy child. On weekends, Kaylee or Brianna would invite Hannah to their place, and then the loving couple could spend many pleasant hours together. The couch in the communal apartment was too small for them, so Michael took them to his luxurious apartment, stylishly furnished and equipped with the latest technology. The man's beloved voice made Emily raise her head from his chest and look at him questioningly. I want to pay for Hannah's surgery. I have already consulted the doctors at the best clinic in town. They will do everything perfectly. Masters of their craft. What would I do without you? Make a baby, and only with me. He smiled slyly and received a weak punch in the shoulder. Michael did not hesitate to bring his beloved to his home, showing her the place where he had spent his entire childhood, met his parents, and ignored their disgruntled sighs. He knew his father was obviously against this kind of love, but he wasn't going to back down. He saw no one else in Emily's place. He was going to marry her and spend the rest of his life together. Alexis, Michael's mother, equally shared the position of her husband, but also could not resist the sight of her son-in-law, finding long-awaited happiness. As a woman, she understood how important feelings and harmony are in a couple. She saw that Emily was perfect for her son, despite his background and precarious financial situation. After all, Alexis was addressing her husband. "Well, don't be so grumpy. Give the kids a chance. Look how pretty they are. The grandchildren will be wonderful." "Shut up." The man banged his fist on the table, realizing he was losing an ally in his wife. "No grandchildren. Only over my dead body." The impending operation roused everyone. The girl almost fainted, imagining that she would have to spend several hours unconscious. While the surgeons poked around inside her, Emily feared that something might go wrong in the process. Wrong, and the situation would only get worse. And Michael was worried about both of them, seeing how they wouldn't pass out from the excitement. He never left his beloved's side. While she was waiting for the doctors in the hospital corridor, Emily could neither eat nor rest. She wouldn't let her guard down for a minute. "You are only making things worse for yourself," tiredly Michael said, urging her to eat the hot soup Alexis had brought. She couldn't sit at home either, knowing that her son could use some support right now. "Listen to him," Emily addressed the woman to her. "Your sister will need you, ready to help her with her rehab." Michael thanked his mother for not supporting his father and allowing him to make his choice of love. When James found out how much money had disappeared from his son's account at once, he immediately restricted him from handling the money. Michael came to him personally to solve the problem, but his father was not confused and made his condition: "Or you leave your beggar and forget about it, or you can say goodbye to the family finances. I was planning to marry you off to the deputy governor's daughter. And what are you doing? Setting me up in front of people. And I already made them an offer. I'm not turning Emily down." My son said confidently, "Like it or not, I love her and I'm going to marry her. Don't worry about me. You've got a smart kid. He will provide for his own family." Emily happily accepted her beloved's offer to move into his apartment with her sister, so she could always be there for him and support him in a difficult time, which he was going through because of a quarrel with his father. The apartment was comfortable, spacious enough for both the lovers and the girl to have their own space. Michael found comfort in tutoring Hannah, having been to several of her rehab classes. He clearly supervised the girl's eating and exercise routine so that she wouldn't slack off and would get back to normal sooner. Kaylee and Brianna, having removed the application from the website of the volunteer organization, brought Hannah's friends to visit them, so that she lit up with their desire to move and was not too lazy to do the necessary exercises regularly. Emily had just written her letter of resignation at Michael's insistence to find a nicer job, and at the same time realized that she needed a break. She complained of feeling sick for a few days, thinking she had been poisoned. Only Kaylee explained to her, with a condescending smile, that this was not so. "You are pregnant, my dear," joyfully squealed her friend into the phone. Emily immediately rushed to the drugstore to get tests, and everything was confirmed. She was expecting Michael's baby. In the evening, he had a pleasant surprise in the form of a cake, which Emily helped bake with her sister. "Congratulations, Daddy." Hannah pounced on Michael, slamming the cake down. As soon as he came home tonight, "Oh my God." He was confused. "I'm going to have a niece." The girl wouldn't let up, and Emily wrapped her arms around her lover's neck. Everything was working out just the way she wanted. Only now the child would be born of a great love of two people. "How I adore you," Michael said on her lips, and then he leaned into her belly, "and I adore you." Despite James' extreme measures, Michael still had money to spare, and Emily had some money saved up too. The couple decided not to delay the wedding so the baby would come into the marriage, and it wasn't hard for the young woman to spend the day in a festive white dress. Their friends helped with the arrangements. The wedding came out modestly. Only the closest people were at the ceremony, but that made the event even more valuable. After all, it was shared with them by those who were genuinely happy for them. Michael was pleased with everything. He could imagine how his father would have turned their party into a disgusting event if he had had a hand in its organization. The bride and groom wouldn't know half the people in attendance. Now he was the head of the family. It fell on his shoulders to take care of the future of his loved ones. Emily. He left home and insisted that she not look for work, but take care of the house and take care of herself and her sister. With a great education, a high-profile family name ahead of himself and business acumen, the man began his own journey. He started his own blog, which proved of interest to many readers, whose numbers grew inexplicably. And he also worked at several remote jobs. That way he could always look after his wife, who needed double custody. Michael's business was slow at first, but at one point he began to receive many orders. He could barely keep up with them. Soon he decided to hire assistants so that he wouldn't lose clients and could maintain the right pace of work. "You look so handsome and businesslike." Emily sat down on the edge of the stool, where her husband sat with his glasses, staring intently at his laptop screen. "It makes me want to distract you." She laughed coquettishly. "I think it was a bad idea to work from home, because the thought of being able to get up and hold you does not give me peace," answered Michael, kissing his beloved wife. "I also can't wait for our baby girl to be born. Somehow I am sure it will be a girl, because I want it that way. Believe me, a girl with our genes will drive everyone crazy. No one will be able to resist her." Emily and Michael enjoyed every day they spent together. Still, the woman sometimes tried to make conversation about his parents. "You need to talk to your father." Alexis said he wasn't happy with his own decision. "Well, one of you has to be smarter and make the first move." "I can't yet," Michael admitted. "I'm still too angry. I'm afraid that our conversation will turn into a quarrel again, and it will only get worse." After talking to her mother-in-law, who regularly communicated with her daughter-in-law in secret from James, Emily told her about her pregnancy. She believed that the temporary grudges were over. A child of their common blood would soon be born, so there was no point in showing her resentment. "Sweetheart, we're expecting someone." Michael looked at the clock, which showed 6 p.m. During his work, he had not noticed how his wife and Hannah had spent the last 3 hours in the kitchen. They had been working on something. Here come Hannah's friends. When he turned around, he saw his father and mother in the living room. The man's face showed only surprise. He was not hostile to his guests. Was that what all the fuss was about? "Well, it's good to see you." Michael hugged only his mother. He shook his father's hand firmly. "Come to the table, please," Emily said to everyone. And the father-in-law noticed the change in her figure, in spite of the apron she wore over her dress. "My goodness, are you expecting an addition?" To the surprise of everyone present, James covered his eyes with his palm and shook. Not everyone immediately realized that he was crying. Michael realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for. His father had recognized his marriage to Emily. "What's the matter with you?" He stepped closer, stroked his father on the shoulder, almost crying himself. "Forgive me, children, forgive me." Barely sobbing, "James, I didn't notice how you grew up. Son, you became so independent. Married and soon to be a father yourself. I don't doubt your decision now." "Emily, my darling." He gently held the hands of his daughter-in-law, who was carrying his grandson under her heart. "Call me Daddy." The family spent the rest of the evening in a touching atmosphere of memories, laughter, and hope. Michael no longer felt resentment toward his father. Everything was forgotten, leaving room in his soul only for pleasant experiences and impressions. Those present congratulated Hannah on her recovery and wished her never to fall ill or suffer so much again. The girl felt happy to be with her loved ones and was happy for Emily, who deserved to meet Michael. She thought of him as her own older brother, who had proven his love and devotion to his 2 sisters more than once. Baby Elizabeth gave birth on a snowy December, making her relatives anxiously await her discharge. Her voice to her mother was the most affectionate and sweetest she had ever heard in the maternity ward. In the few days they spent there, Emily and Michael cried with inexplicable tenderness, seeing the baby in the pink blanket for the first time. "Thank you, sweetheart. I love you. I love you all," her husband whispered, his lips pressed against her temple. "I love you too," Emily answered. drowning in his arms. Soon the young family gathered again in their apartment to celebrate the birth of Elizabeth. Among them was Aunt Sarah, a friend of Emily and Hannah's mother. All the while, the woman prayed for her sister's well-being, and it turned out that for good reason.